You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
From Mamamia, I'm Kate Langbroek and you're listening to No Filter. How does eating 30 bananas a day sound? Or just fruit for every meal? Well, it sounds awful to me. I'll get back to that. And it is relevant to the story you're about to hear. Jacqueline Alnes was 18, a Division 1 runner at University in North Carolina, so she was incredibly fit and healthy. Until one day, she just collapsed. This spiralled into a series of other health issues, and soon her running career was completely derailed by a bunch of neurological symptoms. One minute she'd be hanging out with her friends, then the next minute she was repeating the same word over and over again and speaking gibberish. These episodes were bad, and they only got worse as her friends tormented her, and in some cases even filmed her.
And it's probably the hardest things I've ever watched in my life, just seeing myself in really broken language, trying to express things. And my teammates turned kind of cruel toward me, where they would make fun of my speech or they would play jokes on me to see how far they could push what I would believe in those states. And so that was a really hard thing to reckon with, because I don't have clear memories of it, but I think somewhere in my body I know bad things have happened when I haven't been well.
So where do the bananas come into this? Well, Jacqueline spent years and multiple visits to multiple doctors trying to figure out what was wrong with her. It was during her search for answers she landed in the strangest place on earth, the internet, and the extremely weird world of a fruit-only community. That way of life Jacqueline found across the other side of the world, a couple who lived in Queensland, Australia. These names might ring a bell for you. They did for me. Freely the Banana Girl and Durian Rider. Freely used to call herself Raw Fit Bitch.
Bananas and dates are my favourite food. Bananas and dates, oh yeah, baby.
They exploded on YouTube and social media from 2012, and their followers were passionate. Freely's channel has almost 800,000 subscribers and more than 360 million views. In this chat, we talk about disordered eating and what happens when you get swept up in a very convincing way of life because you're so desperate to find answers for yourself. We're so obsessed with fad diets and quick fixes. You can see a million documentaries or shows inspired by crazy stories on all the streaming services. But why are we so fascinated? People searching for a cure is so relatable, even at its most extreme. And to tell you more about that, here is Jacqueline Alnes. It's such a fascinating story. You are fascinating. You're fascinating to me because you start the story pretty well as an 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old, as an athlete, which is foreign to me. But then as the story progresses, how is it possible that you on the other side of the world find what you think is salvation with a couple of mad Aussies here at the bottom of the earth? So we'll get to that. But first of all, Jacqueline Alnes, could you tell us how your story started?
Yes. I mean, I like the way you summed it up best. But for me, it started, I was, like you said, 18 years old, brand new to college, away from home for, the first time pretty much. I was like 1,000 miles away from my family, running cross country and track. Running was my life. And I had a cough, which I thought nothing about because you don't really think much of those things when you're 18 and you have a cough, and was prescribed medicine and then collapsed after taking it. And my roommate said I hit my head on a desk chair, which wasn't that bad, but I was out for a minute. And when I came back, I remember waking up and everything was just spinning around me. So all of a sudden, the world that had been so clear was not anymore. And the doctor and my coach told me it was an allergic reaction to the pills. And I trusted them, obviously, because why wouldn't I? And I hoped for that too, because we all hope that the easiest solution is what happens to us with our bodies. But the days that followed, I kept feeling like I was like living in a cloud or something. Like the world was just a little bit foggy, just a little bit out of reach. And my body, which, like you said, I could hit any split that coach wanted me to. Like I felt so powerful at that time in my life that to suddenly feel a little bit disconnected from myself, it just didn't feel right. So I tried expressing that to my coach, and she basically told me to run through it because the doctor said I was fine. She said I was fine. The trainer took my blood pressure and said I was fine. And then I collapsed again on the track because I tried to run for them. And then I think that's when they started to realize like I wasn't faking it, or I wasn't just not tough enough to run. I actually had something going on. And so that pattern kind of continued for a period of months because I started repeating what other people would say to me back in conversation. I started losing my memory of events, which meant I would wake up and not know what had happened to me, which was really disorienting and difficult, especially when you're trying to navigate, life as an 18-year-old.
Like it was mysterious what was happening to you.
Yeah. Every day the doctor would say, "You're fine. You're normal. Everything is coming back normal." I got a bunch of blood tests, a bunch of scans. Everything came back normal. And I went to a neurologist. He was like, "Everything's normal. This is an allergic reaction. It's working its way out of your system. You just have to give it time. You have to trust." And so a coach, a medical doctor, a neurologist, a trainer, they're all telling me I'm fine. It was hard to believe in myself when I was like, but I don't feel fine. Like I feel like something's wrong with me.
As we had mentioned, it was a descent to the point where you ended up in a wheelchair, pretty well immobilised in your apartment, and lying to your parents who are 1,000 miles away that everything was okay.
Mm-hmm. I think I was trying to protect myself from also not knowing that everything was not okay. I thought if I didn't tell other people, and I thought if I didn't acknowledge how much pain I was in and how poorly I was doing, it would mean it wasn't actually happening to me. And so I think that was part of it, why I was that way. And I was also just desperate at that point. That was 3 years later, and I still didn't have a clear, definitive, easy diagnosis. And I just wanted that desperately.
Wow. Mm-hmm. You were having really strange physical symptoms. Just reading it actually gives you sort of goosebumps of terror, where you had that kind of lapse. Can you tell me about that when you were with your roommate and you found that you were repeating everything that she was saying?
Yeah, I mean, that to me for sure is one of the most unsettling parts. I think in part that's why I turned to writing, is because now I feel like that's a form of having command or control over my story again, or control over language. But yeah, when it would happen, the first time I remember happening, and after that I don't remember, which in a way is a blessing and a curse because I'm protected from what I don't know, but also it's disorienting not to know what your own body has done or experienced. But I remember she called me Jackie, and then I just said Jackie back to her. And it was this sense that my brain knew what I wanted to say, which was something about going over to watch a movie with the boys on the team. But I have recordings. I watched recordings of myself that my teammates would take. And it's probably the hardest things I've ever watched in my life, just seeing myself in really broken language, trying to express things. And as you read in the book, my teammates turned kind of cruel toward me, where they would make fun of my speech, or they would play jokes on me to see how far they could push what I would believe in those states. And so that was a really hard thing to reckon with, because I don't have clear memories of it, but I think somewhere in my body I know bad things have happened when I haven't been well.
Yes. Yeah. And when you were kind of absent from yourself, they took advantage of that because they found it funny.
Yeah. I think at first it was a sense of alarm, like you're expressing, like it's alarming to see someone normal turn quickly into something that was not. And then it became, a lot of my teammates, one of them, and this is a recurring theme in the book too, I remember he told me, "You're faking all of this, you freak." And it reminded me of what the doctor had told me, what my coach had told me. And I started to wonder, like, am I somehow faking all of this? Like, am I somehow out of my mind? Because I felt like no one in the world believed what was happening to me. And like my former teammates included, who were at that time my closest friends, and they had seen me through everything. So I didn't know how they couldn't believe. Like, why would I want this to happen? Is this my worst nightmare coming to life?
Interestingly, because they had made that video of you in which you were clearly not yourself,
right?
Just repeating phrases, and they got you to take your shirt off or told you there were spiders on your back. And you were kind of freaking out?
Yeah. I mean, so what would happen was I would have an episode, not remember anything, and then wake up hours or the next day later. And then my roommate, who is my close friend at the time, would tell me what had happened. And then I would laugh with her at the time at whatever had happened. So I remember one time there was a picture of me holding a foam roller like you use for running.
Oh, yes.
And they had told me my dog died. And so they had given me the foam roller as if it was my dog so that I would cry holding the foam roller, which sounds so absurd to say out loud, but that's what they did. And there's a picture of me just crying, holding a foam roller that they took for, I don't know, pleasure, to bear witness to what was happening. And I think, like, looking back again with that power of hindsight, part of it, I think, is like wanting to separate yourself from that being something that could also happen to you. Like, I think we sometimes recoil from strangeness, or from things that make us afraid, or from bodies that don't act the way that we expect them to act, because it means if I'm not like that person, then she is faking it. She is weird. She is someone to make fun of. We are good. We are runners. That will never, ever happen to us, which I think I had some of that too. You know, I don't think I'm immune to that. I think the reason I get it is because I also have had to reckon with, what do I think about bodies, and what do I think about symptoms, and what biases do I have?
And also it's very easy to other the disability, because then, like you said, it means it's not going to happen to you. It just happens to this weirdo over here who thinks a foam roller is a dog. Right. I think what we all look for as humans, at least what I learned from writing this book, is that I felt so much less alone, is that so many of us look for forms of control in whatever way that looks to you, whether you're an elite runner who's chasing down times, whether you're someone who's obsessed with a diet because you believe that eating this or abstaining from that is going to keep you healthy, young, whether you cold plunge, whether you monitor things. We all live in an age where we're trying so hard to keep our bodies well, which I think is great to a point. But I think that there's an illusion that that will control ourselves, when in the end, illness happens to everyone, anyone, anytime, for any reason, no matter how much you try to protect yourself from it. Interestingly, when you found yourself in this position of extreme vulnerability, the herd that you had been a part of, this strong and capable and vibrant herd, isolated you and carved you away to a large extent because you became the weaker. Were you conscious of that at the time? And was that part of what the laughing was, where you were like, hey guys, I'm still one of the gang? Was it that? Was it a protection? I think so. Yeah. I think at the time, I can say honestly, I desperately wanted to be a part of the team for the rest of my time at college. And then I wanted to be just going out into the world like anyone else did, running still, enjoying things still. And so, yeah, I think later when I wouldn't tell my parents what was going on, laughing with my teammates, pretending like everything was normal was my way of trying to say, like, look, I will like forfeit and like erase my own problems if I can just be a part of this for a little bit longer. Like, watch how much I'll try to do that, and how to minimize my own pain and get rid of symptoms and do anything I can to pretend like I'm still the runner I was 2 weeks ago when I wasn't. And acknowledging that might have saved me pain in the long run. Who knows? Well, because you were still trying to return to normalcy Of course, which is really the quest of anyone who's unwell. That's really what you want. Nobody wants to go to the doctor and for the doctor to say, I've never seen this before. Do you know what I mean? Like, who wants that? No one wants to be a medical anomaly. You just want to be straightforward. And you were anything but straightforward, which led you in this kind of up and down. You would have some slight recovery and then a descent again. It led you into the relatively kind of newish online world then to look for answers yourself to what might be wrong with you. Where did you start with that?
I think I started where any of us start. I think, I talk to my friends all the time. Anytime you have anything from a headache to a prolonged cough to a weird ache in your back, especially as you age, you Google it first because at least in the US, sometimes it's a week before you go to the doctor. So you have time and stress and anxiety to get out. So I went to Google. They were mentioning epilepsy as a potential diagnosis. So I would do a bunch of, I think there were like quizzes to see if you were epileptic. Like you have to check up.
BuzzFeed. Are you an epileptic?
Exactly. Like a 17 quiz of like, do you have a crush on this person? But medical edition. So yeah, I would just browse around and kind of type in like, how can I get myself to walk again? Because at that time I really couldn't even move around by myself that well. Typing in just like all of my symptoms and seeing what would pop up, typing in stuff like probably really desperately, like, how do I feel better? What I didn't tell out loud to anyone in my life at the time, because I didn't want to sound that desperate of like asking your friend, like, how do I heal myself? That sounds like, you've reached the bottom, but you can ask Google that.
And then up popped, which was probably not totally alien to you because your enduring friendship with your roommate, but she was a vegan.
Yes. Two of my roommates were vegan. I don't want to say mainstream vegans, but they were not, in some sort of like subsect of veganism. They were very much like, we could go out for a vegan pizza, which was new at the time. The cheese wasn't as great as it is now. There was all those burgeoning vegan blogs at the time. So we would make vegan cinnamon rolls. We would do vegan cookie dough. We would eat it while we watched TV. So I had this like fun version of veganism where I didn't really know how to bake or cook as well as they did. So I would always just tag along in the kitchen and sort of just get to enjoy their creations, which I always loved. But yeah, when I found the 30 Bananas a Day website, it was like
hang on. Yeah. Hang on. You cannot say that as though that's just some sort of routine sentence. This was, I believe it's known as a critical defining moment that you found our very own Australian Freely the Banana Girl.
Yeah. I was going to say, can we have some like angel singing music or something? Like, this is my moment.
This was the moment where, honestly, it did seem like some sort of salvation.
It really did.
So Freely, who was this hotsy-totsy 2012 sort of creation of a gorgeous kind of hippie girl, had found the way of being that was a fruitarian.
The number one tip is to eat fast digesting foods. And which foods are they? Fruit.
And what does a fruitarian do?
The more I've gone into the weeds, the less I can answer that question, because some fruitarians would tell you it's fine. Like, most of it is you just eat fruit. That's the basic answer.
Yeah.
The into the weeds version is that there are subsects of them that argue over, well, can you eat a little bit of greens? Well, can you eat a little bit of nuts? Can you eat any cooked food or not? Like, there's all these sort of factions that then have further rules about fruitarianism. But as a whole, very simply, it's just eat a lot of fruit.
And what happened? What did you start to eat? And how did your life, your daily life, what did it look like? What did your plate look like?
I thought it was silly. Like, my very first gut reaction was, this is absurd. I got to the website, and the website, like you said, classic 2012, has like faded green header. Imagine two cartoon people with a bag of bananas curling them like they're bodybuilders. Like, hilarious. It's a little bit silly. There's like a cucumber parachuting from the sky toward a smiling apple.
Right.
Very corny. You're looking at it like, okay, This website, a little bit ridiculous. There's rules like you would rather eat animal poo than fruit, and that's a reason you should eat fruit. Like,
Right.
I was reading it to my roommates out loud, like every night, like a dramatic sort of like, this is a silly website I found. But then I started reading the testimonials of people who had gone on the diet, and they were like me. They were all super desperate. There were former athletes who had like regained their strength and their endurance. They had been like me, just feeling like there were no answers. And then this, they said, was the answer. Like they felt better. They looked better. They could get back to their sports. And so that's when I never fell fully for like the whole shtick of just eating bananas, but I did fall for, if I could purify my body from the evil toxins that were inside of it, I could be better than I was. And so my plate looked like oatmeal, bananas. I cut out all fat because Freely said fat was,
Yes,
she
they were
vilified.
very anti-fat.
I have people come up to me and say, oh, how do I get rid of this? And they slap their belly and slap their ass and, so much fat. And I'm like, well, sure, you need to lose some fat, but a lot of that is also going to be water weight. And it looks like fat. You can jiggle it around and it actually looks like fat.
They basically like vilified oils, fats, really anything that wasn't raw fruit at first. So I didn't quite adopt the diet, but I did just start having these like no pasta, no peanut butter, none of this, none of that, which was like, none of it was based in science. None of it was based in a dietitian telling me anything. It was all based in my own emotional fear of, if I let this in my body, it will poison me in some way, which sounds ridiculous to say out loud now as an adult. But back when I was so desperate,
you were
really
looking for a lifeline. You were looking for a lifeline, and conventionally you were being offered nothing.
Right.
So it makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it aligns with a lot of what we're taught, I think, especially as women, about our bodies, which is what you put into your body says something about you morally. Like, if you eat something, at least back in the 90s and the early 2000s, there were guilt-free yogurts, as if yogurt is something to feel guilty about.
Yeah.
There's like sort of a, like a moral judgment that's placed. So it kind of aligned with that cultural feeling I had grown up with, where I had read magazines as a kid. If I eat a burger, I should dance for half an hour to burn it off. Like that was the way that my body was taught to me growing up, from the media at least. And so it wasn't a far stretch to think that I hadn't done something right in terms of my food that had then made my body sort of get out of control, and that I had the power, or could have the power, to get it back if I tried hard enough.
So when you're talking about Freely, Banana Girl, and Durian Rider, you're really talking about, it was so obsessional, their eating of fruit. So can you just share with us what they would eat in a day?
So in the beginning, when they first started out, they were sort of more puritanical about it than they became later on. They were very obsessed with things being pure and raw. So they would eat anything from 10 bananas blended up in a blender. They would drink stuff called Daterade, which was a bunch of dates in a blender.
We got Daterade here this morning. Juicy, yummy, the best dates around, really. It's really good.
They, when you talk about, I think you mentioned in the beginning, Freely being sort of hippie-ish. Yes. I remember she used to like take raw lettuce wraps to a field. And there's one video where she's just waving one of those flags around you play with when you're a kid in a field eating raw lettuce. It was like sort of this like very pure, organic, all fruit mono meals they were obsessed with, where it would be like you would eat in bulk. You would eat 20 mangoes for lunch because they believed that if you stuck with one fruit, your body could digest it better and it would be like better for your energy levels.
I had 2 litres of orange juice for breakfast, 15 bananas for lunch, and I had another 15 bananas for dinner.
But later on, this is where I started to fall off the bandwagon. They started preaching a diet called Raw Till 4, where at 4 p.m., who knows why, whether your stomach changed or your biology changed.
Or it was a catchy slogan.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Always about the sales, yeah. You could start eating steamed potatoes or cooked corn pasta with low-fat tomato sauce. that didn't have any added sodium or sugar, or maybe you could add sugar, I think. So they started eating like pounds of steamed potatoes at 4 p.m. And that's when people started to have questions about the diet, because before they were like, that's toxic and bad for you. And so they were like, all of a sudden, well, then how do you just pivot, and why this time? And where's the reasoning for it if this wasn't right before?
Up next, Jacqueline tells me she finally got some answers from a doctor that would actually listen to her.
This is a legitimate thing that happens for some women.
Stay with us. It is disordered eating, obviously.
Yeah.
And you were already kind of attracted to that kind of eating in some ways. Mm-hmm. And how deep into it did you go?
Instead of adopting a diet of only fruit, I remember I tried for one day, which is not even a big commitment, but I tried eating just fruit for one day. And I think it was the mental block of knowing that someone else had told me I couldn't have something that made me just break down and say, screw this, I'm going to eat some sweet potato fries at the end of the night. But I did adopt a lot of the rhetoric around purity that existed in that group online. And so for years, I vilified fats. I would think so much about the food I was eating and whether or not it was pure or good. I had weird beliefs because of mono meals about that I shouldn't combine different foods, which were not at all, again, based in science or in anything real. It was based in this belief that like your body would be pure if you just ate one food. I struggled with eating for a while. I did not eat enough. And then for a while, I used food as sort of a numbing mechanism where I ate a lot. I didn't eat from want or need. I ate from like a desire not to feel anymore. And then I went the other way again. So it was like everything in my life. If you're detecting a pattern, it does exist. I run too much. I run not enough. I run too much. I eat too much. I run. And I think all of these things were my attempts to have this control over my life. And so it took going to a dietitian and having them, with science again, laying out, you are a runner, here's what you need, this is what you need to do. And then they would challenge me of like, try eating this for a week. And it would be an emotionally scary thing, but I would do it and then come back and she'd be like, great, look, nothing bad happened to you. You did it and you're here. What do you want to do this week? And so that was really helpful.
What was the scariest thing to eat? Olive oil or butter or?
Nut butters were a big one because I had made them out to be this big, scary thing in my mind. And so that was cereal was one for some reason. I don't know why, but it just scared me. I thought so much about food back then. I thought about food all the time, even when I wasn't eating. And I can tell you now, like, I only think about food because I like it and because I want it sometimes. And I really like that. Like there's a freedom that comes from you go on a trip and you want a croissant and you don't think twice about it because you're on a trip and you want a croissant and that's that. Or it's a Tuesday morning and you want a latte.
Deprivation. Yeah, deprivation really has the opposite effect, doesn't it, on the psyche?
It becomes an obsession in its own right, which is all consuming. And so it's nice to be free of that. And that's why I think a lot of the people I interviewed for the book were young women who first entered the diet because they had a history of disordered eating or they wanted the, quote, dream body that is advertised to us all of Freely was thin. She would wear these hip-hugging crop tops and these hip-hugging leggings that were showing her bones off. And every girl I talked to said, all I wanted was a body like Freely's. And she gave you the message that you could eat as much as you wanted.
As long as it was fruit.
As long as it would fruit and you would have this dream body. And so that was sort of the lie that was sold, I guess.
Hey everyone, so today I want to talk to you about how to get a flat belly. Today I'm going to give you my best tips.
But you went deep into it. And how did it help? Because it did seem, reading your book, that it did help. Did the help come because you started to reap some physical progress from it? Or do you think it was psychological, if you can separate the two, that you felt like once again you had resumed some semblance of control over this body which you had lost control over?
I think it allowed me to believe that at the time, for sure. I think that my real healing came from just resting for a whole semester, because as you read in the book, I only took one class that semester. So I had zero commitments, and the rest of the time I was napping or on my computer, which I think anybody might respond well to, just taking a break and resting up and feeling better. So I did start to feel better as the sun started to come out in the spring, and I could go for walks again slowly. And then I went home for the summer, and my family, just took care of me, and I could ease back into life. But I think that on the whole, looking back, food was just another fake form of control that I turned to instead of actually finding healing in any real meaningful way. I think it was just another way to put off actually dealing with what was happening with my body, in a way of trying to pretend like I had something to control over.
Do you think also, because you were so used to being part of a community and part of a team, and because you had lost obviously the athletics community at this point, do you think you found that with Freely and her boyfriend Durian Ryder?
I will say yes and no. I think I was always kind of a lurker in their community. I never made a username. I never made a profile to go log on the boards. I just was a consumer. I followed all the Instagrams. I followed all the Snapchats. I watched all the YouTube videos, but I never gave back in any way. I just kind of took it all in. And so I think in some ways, it was like a fake way of having a community, because I kind of longed for what they had at the time. It looked really fun. They were just like going on trips to Thailand and sitting by waterfalls and eating mango and making videos as their job. And I was like, that sounds so much more fun than sitting in, an apartment in North Carolina. Yeah. But, I wasn't actually ever part of it. I was just kind of like, I guess a lot of what I get into in the book too is parasocial relationships, where you can think you know someone and you can sort of feel like you're part of their life, when in reality, it's a very empty form of consuming someone else's life when you're not participating in any way. And when they don't even know you, they probably never will.
Yes. Well, that is, there are so many things in your story that are very relatable to people that have not necessarily experienced any of the things that you have. And your analysis of those, what you call the parasocial relationships, is so astute and acute for the times, because the world is full of isolated people, more isolated, I think, than ever. But they think they're connected because they come home from work on a Friday night and they on Facebook, and they think that they're living this life, but they're actually not. Now, when you went back to your family for that summer, you were removed from all of that, and you found yourself, I think, kind of re-emerging. Would that be an accurate way to put it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. I think you're right about the isolation. I think isolation and desperation are a dangerous combination, because I think it means you really start to believe things that when you say them out loud, especially to another real person who loves you, it's reflected back in a way that then starts to sound really absurd. Like if I were to have said half the things I believed at that time, oil is a toxin, to someone who loved me, they would have been able to kind of like talk some sense into like, let's chat about this. But I didn't. And that was the point. And it was the point of like keeping it in and having these rules that you sort of are in your own universe. But my brother wanted ice cream. I wasn't about to say no. I would just live with him, like I lived life the same way anyone else would. And, so
you were in nature.
Right. Yeah. Outside, living in the real world, recognizing that not everything is a glossy, curated smoothie paradise. It's real life, which can be beautiful, but also is more beautiful because it has the nuance of having the boring parts of life or the sad parts of life, or acknowledging the pain and the beauty all at once, which I think makes things richer than just looking through a screen at something nice looking.
Where were you physically at this point?
I moved home to Missouri, which is middle America, for the summer. And then I moved back to college, which went well because I had kind of broken the spell. And then I moved to Oregon after that. So I moved around a lot.
Were you running at all or attempting to?
So I had run a marathon when I was still in college, and I kind of viewed it as like my comeback story, where in all the sports movies, when they play the inspirational music and they finally triumph over their illness or their injury, that came crashing down because I got really sick right after. So I was really scared to run for a very long time. I kind of stopped running entirely when I did my master's degree in Oregon. I was scared of being alone. I was scared of being found alone on the street, incoherent. I didn't know what people would do to me. It was the first time in my adult life that I lived somewhere where, as you say, I had these beautiful, loving friends and I didn't have them with me anymore. And so what was I going to do? How do you explain that to someone very quickly of like, I just need to go to sleep for a while and I'll be okay? It felt embarrassing and I felt like I didn't trust myself out in the world. So I really just stayed in my apartment a lot of the time. And then I moved again. And that's when I started the opposite. I started running almost in pursuit of pain, almost as like a challenge to that, like, who could I have been had I kept doing this or pushed through this pain?
Was there still a part of you that thought that had you been different mentally, you could have had a different outcome?
Yeah. I think when I was younger, I thought if I was tougher, I would have had a different outcome. If I think back, and I often think, if I would have just been stronger or pushed through a few more weeks, could I have just done it? And now that I'm older, I have the opposite reaction where I think, what if I would have been softer? What if I would have actually let myself rest for a period back then and just completely taken off school, completely taken off everything and figured it out, and then gone back when I was ready? But as you said before, we don't have the benefit of our older, hopefully wiser selves looking back and saying, like, take care of yourself, which is why I think I wrote the book, is hopefully to reach someone who does need that voice saying, it'll be okay if you rest. It'll be okay if you're a little bit soft with yourself. Like, you deserve that. You need that.
At this point, and how many years are we from your initial kind of collapse?
I think we're 11.
Right.
So over a decade.
Right. Yeah. How was that?
I feel like I've reached a really amazing place, honestly. I run and I run competitively, but I only run to have fun. So you'll find me at the track doing a hard workout with my friends, but you'll also find me being one of the silliest, probably most annoying ones on the track, because I only do it if I'm out there having a good time with other people. I feel very lucky that I teach writing now to other people, which was sort of a way for me to find my voice and find my power back. And so it feels really amazing to be on the other side, helping them see their lives through different lenses for the first time, or find that. I saw a dietitian, which I read about in the book. So I feel like I unraveled a whole hornet's nest of food rules that I had created for myself.
Do you still eat bananas?
I do. And trust me, sometimes I make banana smoothies sometimes with protein powder, though. And sometimes I just have a flashback to watching the 30 bananas get shoved into or 10 bananas shoved into a blender with some dates and, just thinking about that time. But it's not the same as it used to be.
When you had moved away and was it when you were in Oregon and you were on your own?
Mm-hmm.
And you were quite vulnerable again because you had left, the group of supportive people who understood what was going on with you. Where was the medical fraternity at that point? Had they kind of given up on you? Were they still running tests on you? Were there ever any answers as to what happened?
Yeah, so I struggled with whether to put the answer in the book or not. And
you didn't put it in the book, and it was really annoying. I'm like, what? What was it? What was it?
The last page.
Yes.
Basically, I mean, in my mind, the reason I didn't put it in is because it's still something that's so thorny to me. And the thorniness comes from a decade of different doctors. So, for example, 8 years after my first collapse, I went to a doctor and I talked to a resident assistant for 30 minutes telling him my entire story. And the real doctor came in like 5 minutes later and just said out loud, "Seizures. You have seizures." And I looked at him and I just wanted to be like, no. Even if I do, the fact that my story wasn't even told directly to him, and that after 8 years of them not feeling confident to tell me something, he could walk into a room and tell me an answer,
Right.
made me feel powerless again and sort of frustrated. And like I still hadn't been heard, even if he gave me an answer, if that makes sense. And so I have since found a doctor who, part of it has to do with hormones for me. I had told doctors that previously, and she finally showed me studies where she was like, this is a legitimate thing that happens for some women. And my brain, as I write in the book on the seizure thing, it said like it's 2 different speeds on each side, which means it's a platform for migraines and seizures, which they know. So I basically, long story short, I have never had one on record in a hospital, still haven't been hooked up.
Even though you've been tested just so exhaustively.
Right.
I mean, the irony of being desperate to have an episode,
Right.
which
know.
you normally would never want, but to have
Right.
it in front of some medical experts.
Right. Right. But at this point, I found a treatment that works for me, and I have remained episode free for years. I have a great doctor who like very much listens to me and validates, you know, my treatment plan and all that kind of stuff. That for me is the best place to be, where I feel like most important to me out of all of this has just been feeling like I have someone on the other side who's actually listening to what's going on and giving me the research that shows me what's happening instead of just dismissing or questioning what's going on with me, like taking a real curiosity in it.
Jacqueline felt a lot of shame around her debilitating illness. Her dating life was delayed, but it did finally happen.
I hated myself for a few years because I hated the part of me I couldn't control. I hated that there was this part of me that left me powerless and speechless and memoryless. I just pictured myself as being like just unlovable.
We'll be back shortly. You know, it's interesting when you talk, which you do very honestly, that will come as a surprise, I think, to a lot of people who are not familiar with chronic illness or disability, and you talk about the shame of it. The shame is such a powerful, I mean, it's illogical. We know that it's illogical, but it doesn't mean that you don't feel it. And at what point did you start to throw off the shackles of that to emerge back into the light?
I think a lot of that happened during my PhD, because I remember I had a professor who, she asked me why I didn't speak up in class very much. She's a literature professor who studies disability. So we already had a sort of relationship where we talked about these things in abstraction. And I told her it was because I was scared of my speech thing happening in class. And so sometimes I would come to class when I had symptoms because I was scared of missing. I just didn't want to tell anyone anything that was happening to me. And she said, "Have you registered with the Disability Resource Center on campus?" And I said, no, because in my mind, I thought it could be used against me in the future, just because I worried what people would think of me if I had a condition versus this perception I had crafted of myself for everyone of like, I was this runner, I was a PhD student who was competent in her studies, I had friends, like I wanted to project this image of like, I had everything under control. And she encouraged me to just check it out and see if I could use it. And I ended up doing it. And then I started writing about some of this. And then it started being received in a way where it wasn't a source of shame. People were interested to know more, and they were with me in the pain, which was something I had let very few people do before, just because I was scared of it. And so that was a really big step for me, but it's also one that's made my world so much better and so much more real, in that a lot of the people who are close to me in my life now do have knowledge of me where it's a lot more nuanced than it used to be and a lot more real than it used to be. I guess that's why I compare my story in some ways to the social media reel, where you can curate yourself in a way for other people that only shows them the good, or you can let them in and let them see what it feels like in there.
That's the hardest thing, is to let the light in. And
For
shame,
sure.
of course, flourishes in the dark.
Yeah.
So what we do is, the opposite of what we need to do probably is when we need to open the windows and let the light in, we keep the blinds down and we stay, hunkered down.
That's such a nice metaphor. Yeah. And I think too, it was for me getting over the fear of my teammates had treated me with cruelty. And I worried that other people would treat me similarly. Like I worried that I would be ridiculed, or that people wouldn't think of me the same, or that they wouldn't think I was competent in my real life if I had these episodes. And it's been a few really amazing people showing up for me in physical ways, in emotional ways, and just helping me believe that no, most people are really, really good, and most people do want to sit with you in there and do want to let the light in for you.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, because these are such important years for a young woman emerging into herself and sexually, and that all of that kind of was shut down for you, at what point did that start to come alive? Like, you tell the story of when you were still in a wheelchair and your housemate would wheel you into your class down the front of the auditorium or whatever, and then she'd go off to her class, and there was some guy who asked, he was so lovely, if he could push you somewhere.
I know. Shout out to him. He was great. I wish I would have said yes.
You wouldn't let him push you anywhere.
I wouldn't. It was that same shame-based thing. Yeah,
Yes.
I think, maybe it sounds corny, but maybe it's like that real thing that people say in rom-coms, which is you have to love yourself before you let someone else love you. And, part of that I think is cliche, but part of that is, I think in college, I was just starting to find myself when I was 18. Like, I was just starting to say, without my parents, who am I? Like, what decisions do I want to make? What decisions do I want to make about my body? What do I want to do with my life? And that's a question that a lot of us ask at that age. And I don't think I started asking those questions in a curious, playful way until much later, because for a lot of those years, I was kind of about survival and about, can I function enough to make it through this day? And it wasn't about like, do I have flirting game, or do I have caught today? It was like, can I make it in class and not embarrass myself? And so it took I hated myself for a few years because I hated the part of me I couldn't control. I hated that there was this part of me that left me powerless and speechless and memoryless. I just pictured myself as being just unlovable, to be honest with you. And I think it took years of me learning to love myself in spite of and because of and with the health spells that I did have, and recognizing that I am still worthy of someone who's going to show up the same way that I want to give that love back.
What was your first date? When did your first date happen? Because that must have been such a significant moment, because in the other half of the sliding doors universe, that would have happened when you were 18.
Right. So I worked a job in the writing center in grad school, which is where people would come and get tutoring help. And this guy came in and asked what my favorite book was. And all of my friends after he left said, "Oh, he likes you." And I was like, no, he wanted a book recommendation. And he came back the next week and had read the book and was like, "Do you want to talk about it?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I do." And all my friends were like, "It's a date. You're going on a date." And I didn't believe them. And I showed up. And then of course the guy talked about the book for 30 seconds. And then we went to see a waterfall.
Oh, really?
It was so funny because I just was kind of clueless.
Sure, because you were sort of fresh out of the wrapping.
Right. It was like I was 18, but I was like 24,
Yeah,
you know,
right.
wandering around. So, but I had a partner in grad school, an ex-boyfriend who was like my first boyfriend. And I have to give it to him. He was an amazing partner in the sense of helping me know that what I was experiencing was nothing that he wouldn't be there for. So, you know, we obviously went through our ups and downs personally, but that part of it left a mark on me in my next relationship of understanding like this guy would show up for me and it was not something that he even thought twice about. So that will happen again. And so that was really helpful to have that of like, it wasn't that we ignored it or that it didn't happen and I just made it. It was, he saw it and he said it was okay. And so that helped me gain confidence too.
When you had to explain yourself to him, how was that? Or did you do it slowly? Did you do it or did you?
I did. I think I felt like I couldn't have a relationship, a real one with really anyone without telling them what had happened. Just because I think I had so many quirks, probably, even with touch, with trust. Like there are certain boundaries that if it's crossed, I'm out. It's over. And so, yeah, I did talk about those things, which was helpful because articulating it again brought it out where it was not just in me alone anymore. It was with someone else and they were responding to it. And so it made it less scary than when it was just in my own head. Also hearing, I think a lot of the times I minimized what had happened to me. I did an interview the other week where someone was talking about the cruelty that my teammates had. And I was trying to like minimize it. And she was like, no, it was mean. And it's just, I think validating sometimes to hear that I don't have some like warped perception of the past, that these things that, you know, I write down as just, this is what happened. They're interpreted similarly by other people, not just me in my own head.
It must have been so frustrating not having answers for so long. This interview just made me think about all the wellness gurus and all the different fad diets that have come and gone, and also all the scammers over the years. They're so ridiculously interesting, and perhaps that's part of their power. Like Anna Delvey or Fire Festival, sex cults, extremely religious cults. It's kind of easy to figure out why we're so obsessed. Jacqueline's book, The Fruit Cure, really delves into extreme diet culture, get well quick schemes, fasting, all of that stuff. Fruitarians aren't new, they actually started in the 1800s. Check out her book via the link in our show notes. The executive producer of No Filter is Kimberly Bradish, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. And I'm Kate Langbroek. Thank you for listening to No Filter.